Today, we're going to hear from Beth Guckenberger. She's a sought-after speaker and a lifelong missionary. She and her husband, Todd, run Back-to-Back Ministries, an international orphan care ministry. They lived in Monterrey, Mexico for 15 years and now reside in Cincinnati, Ohio, where Back-to-Back Ministries has its U.S. office. We're excited to hear Beth talk about having a co-missional marriage. Welcome, Beth. We're super excited to have you here with us today. So, for those who don't know you in our listening audience, can you just tell us what's the makeup of your family and kind of how that family came about?
Absolutely. Our first adoption was 26 years ago. And as our family grew in size, I look back and realize how young we started. But we were 25 years old. We adopted a 6-week-old out of Mexico. And I had just given birth to my first biological child. So the first kids, 1 and 2 of our family, really fully functioned as twins growing up, even though they did not both come out of my body. Today we say, well, actually, my husband and I have different answers. So some of your listeners might resonate with that when the husband and the wife have different answers to who's in your family. My husband will tell you there's 8 in the estate because we have 8 that are like legally and formally ours, 3 that we had biologically, and 5 that we adopted. I tend to say 11 because we had 3 8-year foster care assignments. And so those girls aged out of foster care in our family. And I always say if they cost you time and money, still they count, and they do. So I count them. But anyway, we have, of those 11 children, 7 girls and 4 boys. So today, the youngest 4 are boys. They're 20, 21, 24, and 25. And then the next 7 are girls, and they also start at 25, and they go up to twins we have that are 37. So our first son that we adopted, all those years ago, was the only infant we adopted. The rest of our children we adopted at ages 13 and 15. And then we have a fun story, if we'll get around to it in this session or the next, of a young woman that entered our family at 17, but we didn't formally adopt her in court until she was 23. So all kinds of stories in the midst of that. A couple of siblings in the middle of that. We disrupted birth order. We have 3 different colors. There's a lot going on.
I love that. So, everybody in our demographic can certainly resonate with some part of your story.
Yeah.
And so I love that you always talk about that you started so young. You kind of didn't know what you didn't know. And thank God that's part of his grace as well. I heard you recently talk about this topic of co-missional marriage. I'd never heard it before. Tell us a little bit, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's a phrase I've been using for a long time. It's come to mean more and more to me over the years. My husband and I next year will have been married 30 years, and we dated 5 years before that. And in the beginning, when we would talk about having a co-missional marriage, it just meant we wanted our marriage to be more than just how to be about making the best kingdom that we could possibly make for ourselves. We wanted to be outward focused. We wanted to be about something other than just ourselves. We wanted to be contributing to the kingdom of God, and we wanted to do that shoulder to shoulder, like right next to each other. And so in some seasons that look like our co-contribution to the ministry we started. In some seasons that look like co-laboring through a difficult season with a child. So that's kind of where that phrase originated. But I've been studying that idea biblically, and I actually have a book coming out in 2024 about Genesis chapter 2, and it says it's not good for man to be alone, but God created a helper suitable for him. One time when I was in Israel studying, they were talking to me about those words that we translate as helper and suitable and what their Hebrew origin words were, and how we've kind of misconstrued the original intent of that word. That word that we translate as helper is used 21 other times in our Old Testament and really is better described as warrior than helper. God created a warrior, which that makes a lot of sense because we were definitely in the fight together. And suitable is like corresponding. A lot of times Hebrew words are like word pictures that they're designed. Hebrew is kind of a poor language. It doesn't have as many vocabulary words as we do in English, so they build pictures to help give meaning. And so suitable helper is it's like a corresponding, like two planks up against each other. And a warrior is like the person that rides in on the white horse at the end of the battle and helps save the day. And sometimes my husband rides in on the white horse, and sometimes I ride in the white horse. We correspond in that effort. But the whole image and idea that we're in this together, and we couldn't do it without the other.
Yeah, I love that, and as I'm listening to you, I'm picturing just you and Todd and really your shields of faith just kinda interlocked and you're advancing, you're taking territory together as warriors, and you 2 have certainly done that. What is it that makes you so passionate about this particular subject?
I think I think I'm going to fight something, and so I have choices. I can either fight against him, or I can fight with him against what's coming to divide us. And I think the idea that like I we have gifts that complement each other. We have perspectives that are different but can sit together. This idea that he has strengths where I have weaknesses, or sometimes we have similar strengths. Like I should see that the package of tools at my disposal are twice as many because I have all of his to choose from as well. And sometimes, he needs to go ahead because this is actually something he's really good at, and I will come alongside and support. And sometimes I need to go ahead and he comes back behind me. And I think I'm passionate about it because people spend a lot of time fighting about how they're fighting, or they're fighting one another instead of fighting to gain ground, or fighting against their spiritual enemy, or fighting on behalf of their children and family or marriage. They just end up facing each other and fight about how they're fighting. And I think that's what makes me passionate.
Yeah, we have that fight inside of us, right, as Christians for justice. And I love that you give that imagery of there's this battle out here, out in front of both of us, not necessarily between the two of us and not locking horns. That's a beautiful picture of just a couple that's on mission for God and for his kingdom. And I know that both of you are so good at that. I've admired you for decades watching you do that. Recently, as I said, when I heard you speak about this, you talked about there was a period in your marriage where you were overwhelmed, you were
Mm-hmm.
exhausted, and this idea where things kind of became transactional, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. And then something about foxes and vineyard. Can you tell me a little? I'm giving a little bit,
Yes.
but paint that picture for us.
Yeah, I would imagine, at least it's to a certain extent, your listeners would understand what it can feel like to be in a season where when you see your spouse coming, you're not thinking about your connection. You're thinking like, what can you do for me right now? Because at that point, in the story that I'll share, we'd been married about 10 years. We were raising, at that point, 9 children. Those 9 children were all under roof. We were growing a ministry. We we were we looked really productive, but we weren't necessarily being very relational. And our interactions, nobody was doing anything overtly wrong, but they were just a series of transactions with a little bit of affection sprinkled in. And I was studying the biblical books of poetry with some of my friends, and we were studying, Proverbs and Songs and Song of Solomon and Ecclesiastics. And we read this passage in Song of Solomon that says, "Catch the little foxes that want to come into your vineyard and ruin it while your vineyard is in bloom." And of course, Song of Solomon has all kinds of beautiful imagery, and there's all kinds of Hebrew words to explore in that. But the simplest explanation is you have an enemy who wants to come in, and the vineyard is your body, it's your connection, it's that intimacy between husband and wife. And when it's blooming, it's blooming. And foxes want to ruin it while it's in bloom. And I had this honest conversation with just my girlfriends at first about, when I see a fox, I kind of thought the good Christian girl thing to do is to stick my best foot forward and to hide my foxes from Todd. I wonder what he'd do if I told him about a fox. And so that night, I was telling him about the verse and about our conversation, and things got more transparent and more vulnerable. And I said, "What would you do if I told you about a fox that came into my vineyard?" And he said, "Well, I'd get my gun out and shoot it because I'm real interested in that thing being in bloom." And as we began to exchange with each other emotional intimacy, like, here's the things. And foxes sometimes are innocent. like busyness or fatigue. And sometimes they're more complicated, like expectations or resentment or fears or history or what. I mean, they can be all kinds of things can come as foxes. And so we decided that night that we were going to tackle the simplest fox that we thought we saw, which was just just this issue of transaction. And we decided, it felt super radical at the time. We decided we were going to spend 2 hours every evening, not with our cell phones, not co-managing our household, not growing our business, not nothing about the ministry, nothing about my laundry, nothing about it, my email, just just relating with each other, however that was going to unfold. And at first, we were kind of night owls. So it was like 9 to 11 at night, and at first, my household didn't understand. Like the little people were like, "Wait a second, I thought mom was helping me with math homework," and Todd would be like, "Hey, listen, you can go back to second grade next year if you don't figure it out. It's fine." And the big girls, we were foster parenting teenage girls in that season, and they were like, well, "I just broke up with my boyfriend. I need her right now." And he's like, "I promise you'll be sad at breakfast. It's fine." And so we had to teach them that this is actually a primary relationship, and this relationship doesn't get attention. The whole rest of this thing is falling apart. And so in the beginning, I would get into the room at 9 o'clock physically, but mentally, there's a French researcher that talks about how women have a mental load. I mean, mentally, I was still in 100 other places. I was like, did I call her back? Did I get that ready for tomorrow? Did I finish that? Like, I had all, and so we started to use this language like, well, it's a Christian researcher, Shanti Feldman, and her husband, that talked about how men's brains are like screensavers. They fully focus on whatever's in front of them. That's just the way God made them, and that's wonderful. But women's brains have all these like little pop-up windows. And so we used to talk about how could we close my windows before that 9 o'clock. And suddenly we began to commission from basically dinner till 9 in winding our day down. Like, what are we going to get done today, and how can we use each other's strengths to close those windows, and what have we decided isn't going to happen today, and we're just going to put it back on tomorrow. So that already kind of started the train in the same direction. Like, we have a shared goal. And then I realized I might get in the room physically and I might be able to close down those windows, but I had nothing left. I mean, I'd been given out all day long to whoever wanted it, whatever energy they'd like. And I can remember so clearly feeling convicted that we had time management tools and we had a budget to steward time and money, but I'd never thought about how to steward my energy before. And what would it look like to reserve something so that when we had this time together, I wasn't entering in that room on empty. And so, again, that was almost 20 years ago, but we started to develop habits around setting aside space, reserving energy, making sure our minds were present. And that pretty quickly became our deepest breath of the day. And now, 20 years later, I can't even imagine. He will never look at me and go, like, I don't even know who you are anymore, because he heard all about it last night. Like, we've literally grown up together. And we found that all that opportunity and space we created for connecting led to lots of connecting. And the message that can sometimes make people squirm, but I feel like nobody's saying it hardly, so I want to add my voice to it, is the world tells us that intimacy is best for young people, or best for new experiences, or best and exciting with something outside. But we've found it to be just the opposite, that the more we have created space, the better over time our intimacy has created. And we're definitely at year 30 having much better experiences than we had at year 20. And at year 20, we were having way better experiences than we had at year 10. And I think that's the way God designed it. And so we just need to create a life around the way the designer designed it.
Yeah. Wow, you packed so much into there. There was a ton of things. I want to be sure, you talked about reserving energy, right? Not coming into that room on fumes, which is hard to do when you're fostering and adopting and you're going to an IEP meeting and you're running here and running there and taking shoes to this kid and that kid. There's just a
Yes.
whole lot going on. And so practically for that person who has never done that, right? They just leave it all on the field every day. When you say 2 hours, my brain goes, whew, That's a lot of hours. That was where you guys started and where you were at and what you were able to do. I think of 9 PM, I got nothing left in the tank at 9 PM for me personally, right? Um, where would you say to somebody, where should they start if they don't have 2 hours to give and they're coming in on fumes every day? What's some practical advice there?
Yeah, I think movement is improvement. So even if I think the place to start is the vulnerable conversation. Are you happy with kind of the trajectory of how things are going? Do you feel like your needs are getting met? Relationally, emotionally, physically, all the things. Like just being willing to kind of sit in that self-awareness. And if the answers are, it's everything's amazing, well then you know that. And if there's any part of either of you that thinks there could be more to this marriage experience than what we're currently experiencing, then you start to think about what adjustments were. One of our first steps, which I don't necessarily recommend this to everybody, but as we were trying to figure out where to budget energy from, one of the energy suckers in my, at that point in our life was dinner time. Like getting dinner ready, getting everybody down, sitting down for it, cleaning up from it, like the whole dinner thing was a pretty big energy suck for me. But I grew up eating around the table with my family. I knew that was our long-term strategy. Especially at that point, was imagining a world where we would always be doing it. And frankly, we do that now. But in that time frame, it was like, what would it look like if during dinner, Todd took that over, or we paid someone to make our dinner, or what kind of little interventions could we make? And I remember in the beginning, one day laying down at like 5 o'clock thinking, oh my gosh, my family's going to hell in a handbasket. Like only good Christian families eat dinner together. Like I am missing out on dinner right now. And then I would be like, I was with them all day. It's fine. Or I would think to myself, guilt things like, oh, why does he have to do dinner? He was somewhere else all day. This isn't fair to him. But he was getting other needs of his met too. So it was like just this honest way, like we don't do this every day, but what if a couple nights a week I don't join us for dinner? And it looks different. And the kids got a chance to, sometimes, this is not true for all moms, but in that season, sometimes I was interpreting our children to my husband. Like I was literally standing between them sometimes. And this was like giving them a chance to have all of it directly without me kind of interfering. But I think, for some couples, it might be, maybe they're brightest and sharpest in the morning, or maybe some couples, like I've had people say to me, like, you just go in your room and shut the door. Like for them, it actually would be more relaxing to go for a walk, or it would be more relaxing to whatever their thing is. I don't think it's a prescription that people need to do our prescription. I think it's supposed to, I share it only as inspiration that the time has gotten more and more meaningful. In fact, last night I flew in at 11 p.m. and I hadn't seen my husband all day. And we spent from 11 to 1 together because it's such a natural part of our rhythm that missing out on it would have felt like a loss to us. And so anyway, I think whatever it looks like for you, just having the conversation and beginning to think a little bit outside the box about, can someone else pick someone up from school? Could homework, if it doesn't get done by this hour, it just isn't going to get done. Or whatever the thing is that keeps you captive, thinking about how you could release that.
Yeah, I love that. The idea of the movement is improvement, the progress, not perfection. We just want to move in the direction that we want it to go. And I just love you said Todd's perspective. Well, you could repeat second grade. You'll be sad in the morning. And there's really truth there, and that the marriage relationship, the whole ship sinks without it, right? And so it's the children, we're teaching them about marriage when we're doing this as well, right?
Totally. And now that I have young adults, I've watched, they, once upon a time, I have no idea what happened between 9 and 11, especially as they became teenagers. Like, we eventually put a little refrigerator in our room and a small kitchenette because I'm not going out there for snacks. Are you kidding me? They're sucking me in. I know now that if they saw tension in the day between the two of us, which is totally normal and we're sinful human beings, nobody got stressed out about it because they knew that night we were going to get it worked out. And there was a sense of security that they got over time, knowing mom and dad are just fine. And not only are they just fine, they're protecting what we have as a family. And we adopted a 13-year-old. And I know what we say in the adoption community about access and attachment and all the things. And I was like, what's this going to do to him when he suddenly can't? I mean, people can knock on the door if they're bleeding, but like if suddenly I'm not available at 9:15 and 9:30 to show him how to turn something on or finish something or reassure him or get him a glass of water, like what's that going to do? I know how important we say these practices are, and they are. Um, I can remember one night I found him sleeping outside of our door, and I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to be in therapy the rest of his life about this. But when, he had some honeymoon seasons and then he had some tremendous teen years. And I think about if we didn't have the kind of marriage we had had in those teen years, it would have been so much harder on our household. But by the time things really got difficult with that particular child, we were unified. The whole rest of the house did not worry about him dividing the two of us. They knew we were going to be okay. And he couldn't triangulate us because he had watched us prioritize our unity for a long time. And so I think somehow God ends up using all things for good, even when it feels counterintuitive.
We covered a lot of ground and I love it all. I'm just thinking to wrap this thing up, if you had that baby girl, that 25-year-old Beth, sitting in a chair across from you, and you could give her just one tip that's going to make the next 30 years go a little smoother for her. So thinking back, just some wisdom that you've gained over the years, what would you say to her?
I'd probably say two things. I'd probably say don't pout. I think a lot of marriage conflict boils down to selfishness. So I'd probably tell myself not to pout. And then the second thing I'd say, don't take advantage of him. We can, I can take advantage of Todd. I can take advantage of his strengths. I can assume he'll always be there. I can, I can take advantage of him. But if I actively try to honor and protect him instead of take advantage of him, honor is a beautiful grease in the wheels of marriage, and it ends up covering a lot of just my natural insensitivities. So don't pout and honor. That's probably what
Don't
I'd say.
pout and honor. I love it. The Bible tells us to outdo one another with honor, and all marriages probably would be better off if we take that advice daily. Beth, we're so thankful for your time on this particular topic, co-missional marriage. You and Todd have been doing that for 30 years, so you have a little experience under your belt, and we're just grateful for the wisdom that you've shared with us on this today. Thanks, Beth.
Oh, thanks for having me.